And welcome to the Podcaster Nation, folks. Welcome back, actually, because I'm sure you've been listening to all of our other episodes. I know you love it and you want more, and we have more for you today. This is the podcast for you. This is for podcasters, about podcasters, and done by podcasters. And today we're talking to a podcaster. That's right. This is a unique one for me, folks. I got to be honest. I know that there are people out there who do music based podcasts and things like that. I've never actually had the opportunity to learn about them and talk to somebody because, I love the sound of my own voice so much that I just sit here and talk all the time. And that's what my podcasts always are, me chatting and blabbing. Now, what we have today is we have the host of Anything POSI, POSI, and that's a music interview podcast with the host, Brian Black. Brian, how you doing today?
Good, good. Thanks for having me today. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate you coming on. Thank you so much. I'm really am dying to know if we can start just for a second, kind of give everybody a little bit of a rundown about what your podcast really is, because I haven't seen one where there's a focus on music, and then you also have an interview, and then you've got like a message to it too. So just before we get into like who you are and your background and everything else, just give them a quick idea of what the podcast is.
Well, the podcast I do is basically positive music discovery for conscious beings. Let me try that again. Positive music discovery for conscious beings, meaning the first part of it, the music discovery. I do play a free form mix of positive music. Much of it is independent artists, unsigned artists, not all, but a majority of it. The for conscious beings part of it relates to the new thought spirituality or the spiritual, not religious aspect of it. Um, that is part of where the roots of the show come from,
Got it.
is a lot of the messaging and a lot of new thought spirituality and spiritual, not religious spirituality. A lot of thoughts are things, the words we talk about, we bring about, things like that. And I don't necessarily agree with much of the, I don't want to say obsessiveness to that to the nth degree, particularly when it pertains to art and music, because I would like to think that human beings are capable enough to have some semblance of reason and rationality that if you're watching a film or listening to a piece of music, that I'd like to think that you can be an active listener and an active participant in that, rather than being, a passive sponge, which is how it's often addressed in a lot of spiritual circles. So that's the roots of the show. I would like to put forth a more inclusive view, a more inclusive definition of positive music than what seems to be recognized in many spiritual, non-religious communities and discourse. So
Wow.
that
Okay.
accounts for where the show came from.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I mean, that's a lot. That's you can tell that you feel very passionate about this and what you're doing. I can see it in your face right now. Just when you're telling me the story. Now, do you have a background in this or something? Who is Brian Black, and what leads Brian to be doing this sort of thing right now?
Well, I was raised, like many people who were in a spiritual path, raised in a Catholic background. Um, I came across differences in spirituality, differences in, oh, I can believe this too. There's other stuff out there besides not just the Catholic Church, but other stuff besides conventional, mainline, mainstream Christian orthodoxy. So when I first I would come across books about the mystic Hildegard of Bingen. I would come across books by Louise Hay, who was a inspirational writer. She was probably most well known in the 1980s and 1990s. I would come across these books and authors that were articulating a lot of the big questions, the big picture type stuff. And that in turn led me to what I soon discovered was a network, I don't know if network would be the right word, sort of like an affiliated group of churches and communities. Some of them would go by the name of religious science or science of mind. Others would go by the name of Unity. Originally, in some cities, it's still known as Unity School of Christianity. But I just found that fascinating. That keep in mind, I was at this time probably junior high, maybe high school age, sneaking out of my parents' house to go to some of these churches and events. Because
Sure.
keep in mind, if you're growing up in a Catholic household where everything's a sin, anything outside, they probably would have been happy if I went to an evangelical church, since that still obviously would be, they wouldn't be doing cartwheels and jumping for joy, but they'd at least be a little more understanding. Oh, he's not going to Catholic church, he's going to, evangelical church down the street. Cool. So to go from Catholic faith to stuff that people would consider woo woo and you know woo woo type stuff, and more so, and this pertains to why why I'm now finally getting around to this, is I would be the youngest one there. There would be people old enough to be my parents and grandparents, and it's still that way in many New Thought churches. I don't say that to be critical or judgmental or pointing a finger, but the general demographic of New Thought churches is predominantly older adults. And so I was not really aware of that until I got to be a little older. And I looked around and, hey, where are my peers? Where's my age group? It's not that big of a deal when you're a little kid, well, junior high age kid, looking around at, oh, it's like being in a candy store. You have all these new books to read, all these new authors and speakers and new ideas that there's no way you'll ever hear in a Catholic school or a Catholic church. And so just absorbing all the newness of that and all the novelty of it. So I wasn't really aware of that until later, of just how age disproportionate a lot of New Thought still is. There's ongoing discussion to this very day about, oh, what can New Thought do to be more New Thought spirituality? What can we do to be more inclusive, to be more diverse, to be more relevant, to be more on topic for people? And I'm hearing these discussions, and I'm just thinking to myself, um, look at the people in your church. They're they're people's parents and grandparents. There's nobody under the age of 40, nobody under the age of 50 who's in a lot of New Thought churches unless they're there to pick up their kid, unless they're there to pick up their parents or grandparents. And what inevitably drew me to just doing the podcast is much of the culture, and to the point of the podcast, the music associated with New Thought seems to be at odds with what everything New Thought is supposed to be about. New Thought takes its name, and there's always a very stubborn and dogged uh, you know asterisk about, oh, we're not New Age, we're New Thought, and I agree with that it's not the same as New Age, and I think that dichotomy is something that scares people away. The definition of New Thought, for those, I might be speaking Swahili here, and people who might not know what I'm talking about, but New Thought, basically, the long and short of it is simply choosing new thoughts to be happy. Period. That's
Hmm.
all it means. Now, New Thought as a as an organization, as a marketing, or any number of different scenarios, has sort of made itself more complicated and more convoluted than it needs to be. It's often New Thought is often described as a movement. I don't think it's a movement at all. I think when people call it a movement, there's a lot of marketing in that, a lot of marketing and promotion, because what looks sexier to you? If you're a spiritual seeker, you're looking for some place to hang your hat on spiritually. What's going to look more attractive to you? A fellowship or a movement? Does a movement sound sexier? Movement, I'm going to, hang my hat on. So
Yeah,
there's sort
kinda.
of
It does.
a,
I never thought about it that way.
yeah,
Yeah, it kind of does.
yeah. Now, keep in mind that New Thought as we know it originated in the early 1900s. Authors like Ernest Holmes, who wrote The Science of Mind, the basis for science of mind and religious science, Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, the creators of Unity, and example after example. These are authors and speakers and thinkers, for lack of a better word, who started their work in the early 1900s. So granted, there's often a in the over analysis and the over justification, there's often a narrative that it's ageless wisdom, ancient wisdom. And I just hate when people say that, because yes, I suppose it's true that they may have taken much, a lot of their, Socratic method, for lack of a better word, is very prevalent in many thought circles. So that's a given. But to call it ancient or ageless is another term that I see mentioned, is, I think, a little disingenuous. I mean, what's wrong with simply saying, oh, well, New Thought as we know it started in the early 1900s, because that's when it did. When you say that New Thought started, that it originated from ancient times, that leads you to believe that New Thought has been around forever. And it hasn't. It has only been around since the early 1900s, which in the grand scheme of things is not a huge amount of time. It really isn't. Movies, cinema has been around longer, essentially. Well, we had the
Yeah, sure.
hundred-year birthday of movies not too long ago. So cinema is older than New Thought as we know it. But to answer your question, that's the roots of where the show came from, is a sense of restlessness about when is the New Thought status quo, when is the New Thought establishment going to evolve and get more relevant and get more current and contemporary. And rather than waiting, and I do wait, patiently as well as impatiently, I thought, you know what, I'm just going to do it myself and just put it out there and put forth positive music of all sorts, whether it's positive music that's punk, whether it's positive bluegrass, whether it's positive country, positive hip hop, positive metal. And there's a related notion that you can't be spiritual and like heavy metal, that you can't be spiritual and like punk music. Yes, you can. You absolutely can be spiritual and like heavy metal. There's often a pervasive attitude, which obviously I'm not in agreement with, that certain forms of music are necessarily negative and necessarily at odds with the New Thought teachings about what we put forth into the universe, which makes sense. With all the negativity in our world, you obviously want to be mindful of what you're putting out to the universe. So that makes perfect sense. What doesn't make perfect sense is the nuance, the subtlety, the shades of gray in that, whereby people aren't trusted to enjoy and retain their entertainment choices while actively having spiritual interests. That's that's why there's an anything POSI. Because I've had people tell me, "Oh, you can't like this, and this, that's not spiritual. Or, so I know that I've heard that, and I know there's people who have heard that as well, that they're guilt tripped, that they're gaslighted into giving up the music that brings them joy. And that makes no sense to me at all.
No.
There's often a lot of guilting and gaslighting of people who are on a spiritual path, either within New Thought or without, that, I mean, you see that a lot in CCM and gospel music, where there's a exclusivity of music that can only be deemed, biblical or scriptural. And if you dare listen to anything that's not deemed to be, relevant or sufficiently Christian, then you're not being a good Christian and listening to, CCM and gospel. The same thing goes on within New Thought, which just absolutely blows my mind, the level of hypocrisy. It's not that hypocritical in CCM and gospel, because CCM and gospel is founded on Christian principles. Clearly, the ones we all know, the Lord Jesus is your Savior, and stuff we all heard from Sunday school.
Okay.
So in that context, it makes perfect sense. But when you go to a different spiritual avenue where New Thought teaches oneness with the universe, New Thought teaches your thoughts create your reality, and then we turn around and say, oh, but you can't like this, and this, because that's not, you know what I mean? Does that make sense to you? I mean, don't you think that's,
Well,
and I should keep this to I statements. I don't want to, that's what I was like to keep this as my statement. But to me,
I
that just makes no flipping sense. Because if
appreciate the way you're
because if you
setting it up,
stick,
though. Yeah.
yeah,
Just in the comparison, in the way that you're talking about it, you're making your position very, very clear, which is awesome. I love this. I've never heard this perspective. So, I'm kind of enthralled by it right now, just hearing everything because you're explaining it very well. I'm following every single thing you're telling me right
well, New Thought is not really that well known to many people. The one proverbial 15 minute of fame New Thought got was when The Secret came out a few years ago,
Yeah, right.
which was a huge, let's be honest, it was a huge punchline, because it really was a punchline for a lot of people, because it in many ways trivialized very meaningful, very significant spiritual teachings and concepts, and made it into a cute little meme about manifesting a cup of coffee and leading that into manifesting, a Rolls Royce and manifesting a McMansion. And the take home point being that all these spiritual teachings and spiritual principles are all there for you, yourself, and your own selfishness. No thought whatsoever about the world in which we live. No thought whatsoever about manifesting the highest good for everyone, our fellow brothers and sisters in the world, and the various not so nice stuff going on in our world. The Secret made it look like anyone in New Thought who has any familiarity or understanding of spiritual law is only in it for selfish and self-centered reasons, which,
Hmm.
that's a huge turnoff to a lot of people. You don't go into a Catholic church and it's all about me, me, me. You don't go to an evangelical church and it's all about me, me, me. What can I get? You don't go to a synagogue or a temple and they're talking about that. And yet you go into a New Thought church and the prevailing sentiment is all about me. All about me, me, me. What can I manifest? What can I get? Which, let's be honest, is an appealing message. Who doesn't want their highest good? Who doesn't want the most abundance? Who doesn't want that? The issue is the difference between strictly manifesting the highest good for you yourself only, versus realizing that the whole thing about no man is an island. We're all in this together. You know, nobody, we all, no one with that saying, no one, whoever has the most toys still dies at the end. Same thing applies. So whether you want to manifest spiritual laws for your own, for your own benefit, or whether you want to manifest the highest good for your fellow brothers and sisters in the world, at the end of the day, we're still talking about the same spiritual principles. And the New Thought establishment seems to be tone deaf to that, which again is a huge turnoff to people who learn about New Thought. They go to a New Thought church and all they hear about is manifest this, manifest that. And it's a huge turnoff. And it leads to an eventual obsolescence. New Thought in many ways is chasing its own obsolescence. I don't want to be doing a music podcast and introducing New Thought ideas when, because in many ways I'm broadcasting to audio, people that I'm finding myself, because the New Thought establishment doesn't really have an interest in being more inclusive, being more relevant. I know there'd probably be some disagreement saying, yes, we do, but the proof's in the pudding, basically. The proof is in the pudding.
So on your podcast then, because I'm really I think I'm picking up what you're laying down here. The In your podcast, the in your interviews that you do, is the idea to bring awareness to new thought, or is it to actually bring awareness to what you believe is the proper perspective for new thought?
Well, what I think is ultimately irrelevant. Now, to the issue at hand, as far as the interviews, I would love to have more new thought centric guests on the show. I would love it. I've extended invitation after invitation after invitation. And many new thought people, be they ministers, be them speakers, authors, other podcasters, I don't know what it is that they are not the most responsive. It's like pulling teeth.
Hmm.
So I am not really holding out much hope that that I'm going to have many new thought people knocking down the door to be on the show. That's probably not going to happen. I do a more contemporary music show. If I'm putting out there that you can be new thought and like Megadeth, that you can like, Green Day and still be new thought, that in and of itself is a very threatening prospect to a lot of people. When it's the adult contemporary, when it's the oatmeal spirituality, that's not threatening. But what I'm doing to a lot of people in new thought and spiritual circles, I would imagine is very, very threatening. Because if you pull out the rug from people and you say, well, what we're teaching, you know, we don't really mean that. You know, we don't really mean that you can, create your own reality and like, if someone's speaking up to do the emperor's, new clothes kind of thing, people find that threatening. So I have no I don't have any delusions about this being a popular show. It won't ever be a popular show in New Thought circles. It's at odds with the prevailing narrative in much of New Thought. The majority of the interviews that I get are with artists, musicians, other creatives who do have either a passive or, you know, acquainted with spiritual ideas. There are some artists who I have on the show who don't want me to mention any spiritual stuff at all. Others who are cool with it. So ultimately, it depends upon what responses I get. And if the majority of the responses I get are from artists, then that's who I'm going to have on the show.
Hmm.
I
Okay.
wish I knew why. Well, I think I know why. It's because they find what I do threatening and they think it's beneath them. I don't know why they would think it's beneath them, but they
So, I
do,
mean,
or they find it threatening.
Megadeth for sure is an acquired taste.
Sure.
I love the point you're trying to make,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
I've certainly heard my share of Megadeth and the
yeah.
accompanying genre. Um, but okay, I got you. So the
So, but
per
as far as
but
what I think of New Thought, that in itself is not really relevant because if someone's listening to the show and hearing me give my opinion on that doesn't serve anyone at all. That's why I like to play a wide mix of music. If someone, whatever I like to think that I'm putting forth a good music discovery for people to find out what music will bring them joy and what brings them inspiration and what brings them uplift. That's ultimately what I like to do. Now, this may be what you're talking about. When I close out the show, I do have a mini meditation segment
hmm,
where I read from a variety of different sources, a variety of different books. It might be Ernest Holmes one week that I'm reading from Science of Mind. It might be Charles Fillmore or Myrtle Fillmore reading something from Unity. It might be something on a given week. So that is a chance for people to lean more into the new thought principles that are often missed or unacknowledged in day-to-day life. I do have it towards the end of the show, so if people just want to stay for the music and leave when it comes on, they can just stop listening at that point. I know it sounds rude, like sorry, I don't want, but that kind of works out good because if you just want to listen for the music, great. If you want to listen for the meditation and spiritual teaching, that's fine too. But I felt it was appropriate to have an actual living, breathing new thought perspective in the music podcast sphere because there's not any right now.
right,
There's no shortage of the stereotypical spiritual, non-religious that we've all heard before. And I'm not knocking it. I'm not making fun of it. That's a very in many ways lucrative. Um, I don't want to discount it at that um, perspective alone. But it's not for those who are working 1 to 2 jobs just to make ends meet, who are paying down student loans, who are paying for childcare, a mortgage and rent or whatnot. All the money stuff makes a lot of new thought and spiritual and religious stuff seems way out of touch with day-to-day life. And what I'd like to accomplish with the show is to be more relatable, to be more in touch and more relevant to those who might go to a New Thought church, who might go to a New Thought book study and feel like, gee, this has nothing to do with me. I can't relate to this at all. And then
gotcha.
they walk away and they don't get any benefit from it. So I would ideally like to be that relatable voice of New Thought that you're probably not going to find anywhere else because there doesn't seem to be a relatability factor for those who aren't wealthy boomers and wealthy seniors who have the disposable income to spend on classes, retreats, workshops, etc., which, let's be honest, is one of the things that New Thought is known for. You know,
Sure.
best classes, the best workshops, the best retreats. But
Right.
what if have other expenses and you can't make those retreats? What about you at that point? And so to help bridge that disconnect, I want to have that relatable voice be out there for people. And the show won't be for everyone. And that's probably why I don't have as many new thought guests as I'd like to have, because they look at what I'm doing and they feel threatened. They feel like it's, a waste of time, that it's not making any contribution to the discourse and discussion in new thought. And that dismissiveness is precisely why nobody knows about new thought. If you just go to, the man on the street thing,
Right.
ask 10 people if have you heard of new thought, you'll get zero. You will get zero people who've heard of new thought. You can
Interesting.
go to a larger city, go to, try assembling about 100 people. You would have 0 people out of 100 can tell you what New Thought is.
So your podcast is an introduction to folks who are not already privy to New Thought as to what New Thought really is in a lot of ways.
That would be an accurate way of putting it.
Okay. And you start with music. So you've got positive music of all kinds and all genres and everything else, very eclectic group. Then you've got interview with someone of note, an artist, New Thought if you can get them. And then you close with a reading yourself of quite the reading list, except for
Yes.
maybe Rhonda Byrne. We won't see Rhonda Byrne on there anytime soon, from what I'm gathering. But that's a very interesting podcast for people, so they get to be exposed to brand new things, new music, possibly new artists they haven't heard of, and possibly an intro to New Thought that they may not know anything about.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I do open every show with is what's called a spiritual mind treatment. And a spiritual mind treatment is basically the New Thought form of prayer. In other words, in regular standard prayer, it's, it's dear God, please grant this, this need, amen. That's the standard Christian orthodoxy, probably mainline religion definition of prayer, asking God or higher power, whoever, for something and making that earnest request. That definition of prayer is slightly it's not the same definition of prayer that is in New Thought. In New Thought, prayer is typically under the guise of what's called a spiritual mind treatment, meaning it's appealing to spiritual laws to affirm what is already done. The whole
Hmm.
Christian thing about thy will be done and
Right.
all
Yeah.
that about affirming not something that is already separate from where we are, but something that is already ours, that's already ours for the taking, in other words.
Gotcha.
So rather than praying for your team to win the football match, you're treating for a successful outcome of that football game, a successful run for your favorite team. So one is in a form of asking for something, needing something, whereas the spiritual mind treatment is affirming something that is already done, in other words. And
Good
it's sort
deal.
of, yeah, so it's kind of a rabbit hole type thing that's probably more, so, but that's basically the Reader's Digest version of the main difference.
Gotcha.
What was when people in New Thought talk about prayer, it will often, and it's specific to science of mind, it will often be in the context of that mind treatment format. So it's just a very brief, recognition of universal law and then affirming what we know to be true. So that's something that I do start every show with,
Good deal. All
just kind
right.
of habit or format at this point.
Sure. Okay. So I think everybody has a good idea of what the podcast is about, which is awesome. I mean, that you explained it very well in very deep,
Okay,
good
good.
detail. I really appreciate that because, even I, when I first came on, I didn't know all of that you just told me. I was like, oh, this is cool. Different kinds of music. I wonder how this works. I really had no idea you had that much in it. And I love that I know that now. And so I really do appreciate you sharing that. I mean, that's a lot deeper than people think on the surface when they first, may encounter it. Switching over a little to the podcaster, kind of thing. You've been doing this for about a year. Yeah, about that.
Yes. Mhm.
Okay.
Right.
And you publish once a week is what
Once a
you told
week.
me. Okay. So you're somewhere in the 50 episode range right now ish. Good deal. All right.
Yes.
When you first started, did you, buy a whole bunch of equipment? Did you invest a bunch of money? Did you just go bare bones? What was the experience like for you when you first started your podcast?
Well, the experience was simply needing to do it, doing it first, and then getting the equipment secondly. So really bare bones, just basic DJ equipment comparable to DJing a radio show where you'd have the capability for a mic break. There's no shortage of equipment where you can mix music but you don't have a mic. I don't know how many mic plugs and auxiliary cables I've gone through before I found the right match. I would have somewhere the sound would be non-existent. I would have some where the sound was very tinny. It would be either one error, two errors. I would have a number of different plugs and adapters, the regular mixing board cables, adapters to those HDMI ones. So I just trial and error. I've got a closet full of old wires and extension cords that attest to that.
That's, I mean, that's, I love that. Podcasters around the country right now are going, yep, yep, I understand. And when you say that, I went through a whole bunch of them. Everybody in this group right now is thinking, I remember that one. Like we're all flashing back now to that one that was just garbage that we ran
Yeah,
into
because
at some point.
you get the one, it's like, aha, this is the adapter I need. This is the adapter that'll fix it. And then you click order on Amazon, then it arrives and it gets there and you plug it in and it's son of
It just
a,
doesn't work.
yeah.
Exactly, exactly. No, I love it. Okay, so that's a great way to go. I'm glad to hear that you didn't sink 25 grand into it or anything insane. So now you've been doing it for a while. So what have you noticed is the biggest difference about doing it now for you as opposed to when you first started?
Well, then the main difference is I would say I'm more that's a good question. I would say more people know about it, I
Sure.
suppose. I'm on your show, so that's am I like sort of famous now? So I'm like, is this is like cool.
If you're not
This
already, you're
is
gonna be,
yeah.
right?
Um yeah, I mean, I guess I don't know if this is an appropriate answer, but I've gotten more aggressive and restless about wanting to get it out there. I know that a lot of podcasters really aren't that aggressive. I don't say that in a negative way, but
Mhm.
if you want people to listen to your podcast, you got to you got to let people know, hey, this is what I'm doing. There's often the whole thing about oh, just putting it forth and then just the whole thing about putting it up, what days work best or what platform works best, and for me, the more important point is if what you're doing is to you urgent enough and important enough and people need to hear this enough, then you're going to be as persistent and as aggressive and as putting out there as you need to be to let people know it's out there.
Mhm.
That's what I found to be the case. Because it was just a matter of just putting it out there on a set schedule, whether it's Tuesday, Wednesday, whatever the case may be, and having it go on Spotify or iHeart or wherever, and just sit back and hope that people magically show up. I don't think that just doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, it's like many of the artists that I play on the show. If you're just putting something out there and just expecting people to find it, they're not going to find it. And I think
Right.
that pertains to every podcast. If you're doing a podcast that you want to be the next Joe Rogan, I mean, A, you're probably not going to get that $1 million contract. And B, well, why don't you I would like to think that every podcast is doing their own thing, their own niche. The whole something that only you can do. In my case, it really does seem like I'm the only one doing what I want to do.
Sure.
And the podcasts that I tend to listen to tend to be the ones that I'm not hearing anywhere else. If there's 20 different podcasts that all want to be the next Joe Rogan, and there's one podcast that's talking about, I don't know, foreign language horror movies, I'm going to go listen to the one that's about foreign language horror movies. If there's 30 podcasts about the latest celebrity scandal, some whatever was on TMZ or whatever, something about the Kardashians, and you have another podcast talking about, you know, warlords, can't talk today, warlords and Chinese um, art of war and early Chinese history and stuff like that. I'm going to listen to the podcast about the Chinese history. So it needs, for me, it needs to be unique.
Hmm.
If it's not unique, I'm not even going to bother to click on it at all. I'm just
Interesting.
not. It could have the nicest thumbnail. It could have the nicest description. It could be nothing but 4-star ratings. But if I don't think it's unique enough, if I don't think it's exceptionally unique enough, I'm not going to bother with it. I'm just not.
I mean, that's some great advice, honestly. I mean, that I usually ask somebody, what kind of advice they have. That's fantastic advice to give people to get into your niche, to really to work it, to own it, to get down into it. Um, and I love what you had to say about, promotion and stuff about the podcast. A lot of people really do believe that if they just build it, then they will come,
Mm-mm.
and that just isn't how it works. So, I appreciate
And
you
the
saying
thing,
that too.
yeah, and the thing that I'm really more attuned to than when I first started is many of what people, offhandedly and accurately refer to as podcasts are these big corporate portfolio, huge, corporation conglomerates spitting out podcasts like their Netflix. And those
Right,
get mentioned in the same breath as an independently produced podcast that doesn't have the benefit of being in some corporate portfolio
right,
with guaranteed news coverage on, any number of different news sites. So
right.
I think the whole apples to apples comparison in podcasting doesn't really get mentioned a lot because let's be honest, much of the coverage of podcasts goes to the big corporate portfolio shows.
Right. And you're not wrong. I was watching a news program the other day, and I think there were like 8 different hosts at different times throughout the program. Every single one of them had a podcast that they wanted to push before they were done giving their report. you know, and so you're nailing the head. I always I ask everybody this, so it's time for my corny question. And that's just what I call it because
Yeah.
I get great answers though. So the question is, when it comes to doing your podcast and everything that goes into it, what do you love the most about doing your podcast? Okay. And then I know it's a strong word, but what do you hate, or what do you dislike the most about doing your podcast? Okay. Doesn't matter which one you start with,
Yeah.
go.
Well, what I love most is how therapeutic it is. It really is. I know that's cliche, but unless you've really been there and you really have been through just a day from hell and then you just get the gear loaded up and do it and how therapeutic it is, it really is true though. It really is therapeutic.
I love
And
that. Yeah. I feel the same way. I love
yeah.
that.
Now, as far as the part I hate that what I'm doing, at least in new thought environments, seems to be threatening to a lot of people.
How you
So
receive. Yeah.
yeah, how I'm received. So I hate that part. I hate that even though new thought and spiritual, not religious, is supposed to be about love and compassion and connection and kumbaya, where's some of that love for me?
Right.
So
Right.
I don't like that part. How it seems to be a source of contention or upset or offense for people in New Thought when I'm only looking to be inclusive and bridge building and making connections.
Yeah.
That's precisely why I do play a wide variety of music to be as because if the show were all about what I want, I'd play nothing but punk music for an hour. It would be boring as hell.
Really,
Not knocking
you're a
punk music,
punk
I do
guy. I
like
had
it.
no idea you're a
Yeah,
punk guy. All right.
yeah. Um, so and plus, who would want to listen to me pontificate about New Thought for an hour? No one would want to listen to that. So I'm very clear about separating what I want versus what I feel is a need that needs to be served.
Awesome. Awesome. I
So,
love
but
that.
yeah, I would say, yeah.
Great. Again, great answer to the corny question. So thank you for that. All right. And I've taken a lot of your time and I really
Yeah.
appreciate everything that you've shared with us tonight and the way in which you have. It's been very thorough. You can tell how thoughtful and passionate you are about all of this, and I appreciate you bringing that to the show today. So thank you for that. I
Okay.
do have one more question I want to ask you. You gave some good advice earlier, and if that is still the answer to this question, that's okay. But you've been doing it a while, and when you've been doing it a year, you've learned some things. So especially now, um, for a new podcaster or someone who's got a few episodes under their belt and they're trying to ramp up, what's your best advice to a new podcaster, someone who's trying to ramp up a little bit, um, on how to succeed in podcasting, not how to get rich, but how to
Mhm.
succeed in podcasting?
I would say look for podcasts that are like what you're doing. And if there's someone who's doing your podcast better than you are, and that, and let's be honest, there are people who are doing better podcasts than all of us. That's,
Sure. Yeah.
nature of life. If there's someone doing your podcast niche better than you're doing, then go back and think about what you can do better, what you can do to have it be more unique. Because if you can't be better, I know it sounds defeatist. There's no way this what's not defeatist. If you can't be better than someone else, then be more unique, be more exceptional, be more one of a kind, because the uniqueness and the one of a kindedness, that's just as valid, if not more, than the being better, because the being better, that only goes so far. And if you're better at something, you've got obviously higher expectations, higher, constantly having to prove yourself to stay there. Whereas if you're something that's unique, something you're not going to hear another podcast, that's what our world needs. We don't need more cookie cutter copies of other people's podcasts.
I love
And,
that answer.
and there's no harm in just acknowledging, okay, this podcast does it better. That's a perfectly valid, reasonable thing to admit. There's people who, I'm sure there's people who will be better than me, which is fine. I want people to do a better show than me. That's my ultimate goal. If someone shows up with a podcast better than mine, I'm all for that. I'll be the first to recommend it and say, my show sucks, your show's better. I want that. I mean, isn't that what breaking records in baseball is all about? Like
Sure.
someone has a home run record, whatever, and then someone breaks it, and it's like awesome. That's what this is about. I mean, it's not about, like you said, not about getting rich. It's about doing what you're called to do, what only you can do. And if you're not doing something that is not unique and singular and one of a kind and all that stuff, then why are you doing a podcast? So that's
All right.
that's the question that would need to be answered first, because there's always going to be someone who has a better podcast than you. That's life. So
Right.
knowing that, don't get into the better than or whatever. Don't get into that, but get into the what am I doing that's unique? What am I doing that people won't hear in other podcasts? And if you focus on that, that's what's going to have the show's longevity, because you're doing something no one else can do. You're doing something no one else. It, it's yours. I mean, if it's yours for the taking, take it.
I love that
That's
answer, but
the thing.
I've got to be honest with you though, Brian. You scared me for a minute. I really thought you were going to say, I really, really thought you were going to
Oh,
say, if you can't be better than that person, then don't bother. I was like, oh my gosh.
oh. No, I mean, you know
I
what I mean?
love
Though,
your message. It's great.
but everyone doing a podcast, they've got something that's theirs for the taking.
Right. Right.
And why not just take it?
No, it's
It's
great. I mean, it really is. Either be better or, be unique. And
yeah,
that's
exactly.
great advice. So, like I said, you just scared me a little. All right.
Huh.
Listen, Brian, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really enjoyed this. I enjoyed talking to you. I
Of course.
enjoyed learning all about this. I've never talked about this type of a podcast before. It's been great. And I really thank you for coming on and sharing all that. It means a lot. And I think a lot of people are going to get a lot out of it.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. So, all right. I have kept you a long time. I'm going to let you go. Thank you.
You will.
Folks, this is the Podcaster Nation. This is the program that is yours. This is our community. It's your community. This is about podcasters, by podcasters, for podcasters. This is the place where the rising tide really does raise all ships. So you need to keep sailing. I will talk to you guys soon.